Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tama Nicholson. I'm the Program Manager for the Career Training USA program here at InterExchange. I want to welcome you to InterExchange's Career Guidance webinar series. In today's webinar, we're going to review the field of architecture. For those of you who are unfamiliar with InterExchange, we are a nonprofit cultural exchange organization based here in New York City. We administer various cultural exchange programs to help students and young professionals undertake meaningful cultural exchange opportunities in the US and across the world. Within InterExchange, the Career Training USA program administers the J1 intern and the J1 trainee visa programs. We provide J1 visa sponsorship to candidates who have already secured internships or training programs in the United States. So a sponsor is required by the US government for anyone seeking a J1 visa, in addition to helping individuals and hosts to complete their applications and their paperwork needs to get a visa. We provide pre-departure and settling in resources, and we check in with participants throughout their program to ensure safety, well-being, cultural engagement, and program satisfaction. As you may know, we have had to temporarily pause the issuance of visa sponsorship until conditions in the US allow us to safely welcome new interns and trainees. However, in addition to continuing to be a resource for students, in order to continue to be a resource for students and young professionals seeking professional development experience, we are continuing to coordinate webinars that include panels of industry experts to share their experiences and their advice. As I mentioned, today we will focus a discussion on architecture and various industry tips and trends. So just some quick housekeeping before I introduce our panel. Due to the size of the audience, everyone is muted, but if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, just type them into the chat box. We'll do a question and answer at the end, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our two panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Kelly Haig. Kelly is a partner at Design Lab Architects in Boston, Massachusetts. Kelly holds a Bachelor's of Design, a Master's of Architecture, and a Master's of Science in Architecture Pedagogy from the University of Florida. Some of her recent projects include the Delbridge Family Center for the Arts, the Hitchcock Center for the Environment, and the Emory Community Arts Center in Massachusetts. I'm also joined by Jaime Donate, the Senior Architect for Robert Young Architects in New York City. Jaime was born and raised in Puerto Rico and holds a Bachelor's of Architecture from Carnegie Mellon, as well as a Master of Architecture from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. His projects span domestically and internationally, from Manhattan and Martha's Vineyard to the Bahamas and Kazakhstan. In his current role as Senior Architect for Robert Young, Jaime's responsibilities include heading the firm's recruiting efforts and managing design staff. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Jaime, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
I don't think my introductions provide the full scope of either of your backgrounds. So I think to maybe kick us off, can both of you tell us a little bit more in your own words about your organization and the scope of your role? Jaime, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So my office, Robert Young Architects, is based in New York City, and we are relatively small, especially for a New York firm. We are about, it varies between 12 and 15 people. The majority of our staff are architects, and we have some, minor kind of marketing and kind of office administrators. But for the most part, 95% of those 15 are architects. Sometimes, not right now, but sometimes we may also have interior designers, depending on our projects. And we probably have a number of projects running at the same time, usually between 5 and 10, I would say. Depends on the size of the projects. The majority of the projects are residential, private residential, either in the city or kind of the New York metropolitan area. So anywhere to, I don't know, people who are familiar with the East Coast, but Eastern Long Island, area where the Hamptons are, to could be Martha's Vineyard or Cape Cod. Also Westchester County or Fairfield County in Connecticut. And so it's kind of the New York City region.
Great, thank you.
Great. So I work at Design Lab Architects. We are in Boston. We're a 20-person architecture firm. We've been that for the last couple years, and most of our work is with mission-driven institutions and nonprofits. So we work on a variety of libraries, art centers, educational spaces, things of that nature. Quite a bit of our work involves adaptive reuse, which is great because we get a lot of different kind of a broad range of building types. So, you know, anything from classical Beaux-Arts renovations of libraries to mid-century, and even more recently, some postmodern work. So there's, you know, if you look at our portfolio, there's kind of a range of styles, but they all have really similar approaches in terms of how we start to intervene. So the firm was founded in 2005 by Bob Miklos, and I joined in 2008, so shortly after it was founded. And I actually joined right out of grad school, out of the University of Florida. So as Tamin said, I did stick around UF for quite a while, and then, you know, came up to Boston to join Design Lab specifically. So I had intended on going back into academia, and I'm still there 12 years later. So right now I'm one of 4 of the kind of younger managing partners, along with Bob, who is still, you know, active within the office. And I would say right now, as kind of a partner, I'm, you know, doing anything from kind of keeping the firm running and keeping work coming in the door and marketing, things like that. We do, you know, I'm principal on different kinds of projects, so interfacing with clients, working with design teams. Within the firm, we've kind of divided amongst the 4 managing partners different roles, and so I'm the ideas and education realm. So anything that falls under kind of that umbrella, oftentimes is within, you know, kind of my scope and focus. And then, you know, we do try to work between partners and staff at all levels really fluidly, so we can kind of flex up and down into different positions based on the project. So it kind of gives us a lot of variety.
Great. We'll definitely, I think, touch into some of those academic skills that that you might have as we go through this presentation, give you an opportunity to continue and teach a bit. So Jaime, what has been your career trajectory from your graduate program at Harvard to where you are now? Have you been at Robert Young for that duration, or what were some of the other internships and past positions you held?
Yeah, I moved to New York after I graduated, and I've worked in 4 different firms during that time. It's been about 15 years, and I've been at Robert Young for the past 2 years. I've always worked in similar firms. I've always been attracted to kind of small, what we call a boutique firm, which are very kind of design-driven, design-focused firms that tend to do a fair amount of private work, either for institutions or sometimes like it may be a commercial client, but more often than not is actually private residential clients, and that is part of my interest. And kind of I ended up there kind of by coincidence, but it kind of became my kind of calling and interest, and from a kind of design and perspective, I guess. And so the first place that I worked at, I literally started working like 2 weeks after I graduated, and I was so like ready to go. And I actually wish I had taken a break or something, but I was just like, well, I don't know, I graduated, and what am I gonna do? I'm gonna sit around now. So I moved to New York, and I started working, and I was there for 4 years, and that was a pretty kind of concise experience. It was what here in the States people call kind of like your IDP period, which is like that time when you get your training or your kind of professional training to get your hours, so you can actually qualify to start. Actually, this has changed, but back when I was doing it, you said you qualified to start taking your licensing exams. So those kind of 4 years were kind of very formative. I was working, well, pretty small firm. We were about 6 to 8. I think the biggest it ever was like 10. And I had the opportunity to work, had a lot of access to the one principal, and her name is Audrey Matlock. She's still a friend and a mentor, and it was a great experience for someone who was coming out of academia and kind of transition into professional life. She also had a very kind of strong sense for I guess an academic approach to design. So it was a good transition into other offices that I worked in later on as I kind of became more mature, and then that were a little bit more, I want to say, not business focused. They were still very kind of design focused, but a little bit more business savvy and more less idealistic and maybe more practical. So I then worked at a firm for about 2 years, and that was an incredibly small firm. And for a brief stint, I was working on a number of residential projects, but the firm mostly did kind of design build and kind of speculative developer work. And I kind of realized that wasn't my calling. And so after about 2 years or a year, it was just short of 2 years, I decided to change paths, and I ended up working for Andrew Franz, architect, and that was or is a pretty small firm. They have about 10 people as well, and I was there for 7 years, and I came in kind of in like a middle level, but I actually grew a lot and kind of became basically a second in command. So I was just kind of the owner or the principals, whatever you want to call him, the single partners, kind of right hand, and I was very much very much involved in kind of the running of the firm and kind of the kind of leading the not only price but also kind of the firm direction. So that has kind of continued that kind of approach or kind of like involvement not only in price but also in firm management. It's something that I'm doing on my current job, and something that it's actually really enjoyed. I think it's part of where all of us kind of mature into and kind of feel that we have a voice or we have an opinion, and it's nice when it's heard, or when we know that we can contribute in some way that is not just being part of the very kind of straightforward design staff.
It sounds like for both of you, the formative experience that you've had, like the practical experience, has been able to shape the area of architecture that you found your calling more so than probably you could have learned in school, with just the theory component.
Right.
What does the typical day look like for a partner, for a senior architect in your respective positions? Kelly, maybe we can start with you.
So kind of the day?
Yeah, if there is an average typical day.
Yeah, because I feel like it varies quite a bit, especially I think within the architecture profession. We're kind of at the whim of the project and where any given project is. Typically in our firm, people are staffed on 1 to 2 projects. So, you might work on those projects. It's really important to us that we have staff as consistently kind of focused on a project from start to finish as much as we can, which we think leads to better outcomes for the project, because you're not kind of trading off. And also we think it allows people to kind of take something through fruition, and you learn different things at different phases. So I think we're all kind of constantly going through this kind of 2-year cycle of a project, which is what most of ours are. But anyway, so to the work day, I think that during the early phases, it's it's a lot of big picture stuff. It's a lot of internal charrettes and internal design investigations, kind of looking larger, big picture. You know, obviously interactions with the client, prepping for materials for presentations, things like that. So I think, you know, it's always great when you can kind of pair that with another project that's coming to completion, so you get some balance. In later phases of the design project, it's a lot of coordination. It's a lot of working with your design team and, you know, having coordination meetings and, you know, kind of all day, you know, sessions to try to like work through all the details and make sure it's buildable and make sure it's coordinated and kind of everybody's moving the set along. You know, detailed user meetings, things of that nature. So it's, you know, I think the day-to-day every day is different, but, you know, it's kind of around these workshops at various scales. When your project's in construction, I find that to be one of the more fun times because you learn so much. Usually during that time, you know, I and one or two of the people from the part of the design team, you know, we have at least one meeting on site a week where you can walk around and learn from the contractor day to day. And it's a lot more kind of paper pushing and going through submittals and shop drawings and things like that. So it's really fun to have that piece of it paired with in the field, you know, learning all those things that, you know, maybe are going to resolve themselves differently in the built project than maybe you had imagined in the earlier phases. And then I guess I would say as a partner, I do a lot of other kind of traveling fairly regularly, whether it's marketing initiatives or going to conferences or speaking. We really try to be kind of involved in the design dialogue at, you know, certainly a national scale. We go to a lot of conferences and present. So, you know, there's travel associated with that and a lot of prep associated with that and just kind of developing the content. So I think it's good to kind of step away from the day-to-day grind and get that perspective and talk to other people. And then I would just say, while kind of the day-to-day varies quite a bit depending on where you are, we do try to get the staff together frequently, just within the firm, so that everybody is kind of touching base and has a little bit of grounding. So we do, you know, firm-wide share-outs on Monday just to make sure, you know, everybody kind of understands all the projects that are kind of moving forward and how different things are progressing. We have lunch presentations, we have kind of formal and informal engagement. So I think, you know, and a lot of this is kind of under my realm of ideas and education, but it's like, as much as we can get people together in the room, so we're not just kind of cohabitating and like on our machines, but we're actually like together talking about things, is really, I think, something we miss in this current world, but it's something that we try to like structure our weeks, I guess, by these engagements.
That makes sense, to kind of keep a balance of all the projects, all of the different tasks that are happening, and what, so no one's siloed. I feel like is probably difficult, as you have certain projects that have certain phases that are in completion or just starting.
And I think if you know what other people are doing, we actually started doing the Monday share-outs as a way of telling people when we needed more help and when we could give more help. So it was a really good way of having people say like, oh, actually, I have some extra time I could give this week, like who needs it? And I think what's good about that is then you kind of dabble in other projects just for the sake of helping them meet a certain deadline. And otherwise you wouldn't necessarily know with 20 people, like who does have an extra few hours to give here and there. So it's been a good way for people to see each other as like resources.
Jaime, how does that compare with your typical day or your typical plate of activities that are on your desk?
It's similar in a way. I mean, we're definitely a smaller firm, but the same thing. You know, every day varies, and it's sometimes very vulnerable to what's happening with a specific project, whether it's a client presentation or a client situation. If there is something you need to address with them right away, or if there is definitely people, you know, if you have a project under construction, which, you know, for the most part, I always have at least one project under construction. You have some priorities that you need to address right away. Usually in the morning, contractors start working quite early, so that they are ready with the phone or with the emails and questions by the time you show up. But in terms of kind of the day-to-day or even a weekly cycle, we have a similar situation when on Mondays, the very first thing we do is that the senior staff gets together for a relatively quick meeting, probably half an hour, 45 minutes, to kind of discuss current issues and kind of confirm the staffing for the week. Kind of go through different projects and where people need, where people are needed or how they're moved around. Same thing, most people are working 2 or 3 projects at the same time. So we kind of have to evaluate what the priorities are for the week, or, it doesn't change week to week, they're kind of like monthly cycle or so on, but it's just kind of confirm that people are still gainfully used in a project, and if somebody's available, then we can move them around, and then that translates to a second meeting with the entire staff, and it kind of run through kind of like a game plan. So it is an opportunity to kind of somebody say, oh, by the way, I'm actually kind of learn what's going on in the office, but also say, I can probably be available, or I have more time, or this is actually almost done. I can jump on that if somebody needs me. So and it is very helpful to have people be aware of what's going on outside of the project. I think it also builds like a lot of kind of good office morale, which is something we all need right now. So right now we're doing the same thing. We're kind of doing it all remotely every Monday. We just get on one of these Zoom calls or whatever platform you're using, and have those meetings. And so it actually is kind of nice to be able to maintain that communication. It's so important. In terms of the actual day-to-day, I probably used to go to the office, and I tried to get in a little bit early just to kind of be a little prepared for the day. And it's really more time for me to be by myself. By the time I usually people start showing up, not only do I have a number of emails to get back to clients or contractor calling, like I was saying, but I have a number of staff that for the most part rely on daily check-ins or daily direction. So usually you need to have either material review ready for them to keep going on, or be available to meet with them for questions or for input. So for the most part, I spent probably the first kind of quarter of the day handling correspondence, whatever that is, emails or calls. Probably there's another quarter that goes into kind of reviewing the staff's work on different projects and kind of checking in with them in some way or another. And then probably the other half is working on projects that I'm kind of like my own tasks in the project, things that I'm working on the design or whatever it is. And either for the a project, a real project, or an office kind of endeavor.
Great. As I was hearing you both talk about different projects, I was thinking back to our last webinar that we did about the field of business and different areas that people might want to specialize in. Is architecture a field that people should or could specialize on certain projects, or is it more all hands on deck? It's important to know everything about the construction and the design simultaneously, or would you recommend that people become experts in certain facets of architecture?
I think the need is quite broad depending on the scale of firm you work for. I think if you, and I've never worked at a very large firm, so 20's the maximum I've had. I think for us and for our firm culture, it's important that people are versatile and that they understand kind of, we try to do think of people as like the full architect that kind of understands lots of different pieces. Now, granted, some of us have more, I have more experience in the arts and someone else has more experience maybe in libraries. But like, I think that it's still very blended in terms of like our skill sets and what we know. But I have, you know, peers and friends in large firms, and it is very like you come up with your specialty and like you dig in deep to it, and you kind of are that role on lots of different projects, or you kind of can spend all of your time focusing on one facet of it. And I think if that's something that you can be passionate about, then I think that's totally fine. But it is a very different kind of, I think, a very different way of working, and you kind of have a different impact on, you know, the work than if you kind of are thinking comprehensively about the whole thing. So I think it's really like what is your personality, and what are you most interested in, and what do you feel like you really thrive in, and then like find a firm that has, you know, that role and that need.
That makes a lot of sense. Jaime, would you agree in a smaller firm like your own, that's versatility is key?
Yeah, it is. And same thing, we look for people who are very well-rounded, you know. We all have to be a little self-sufficient and everybody needs to be able to, in our office, needs to be able to design, needs to be able to draw, needs to be able to look at a budget and be able to study it and have an opinion and analyze it, and needs to be able to communicate to our consultants or engineers or whoever they are, needs to be able to communicate to a contractor or a client, you know, have that kind of malleability in their persona on how they engage with the work. If somebody is just, you know, we don't have room for somebody who's just drafting like that. Oh, we wish we did, but you know, the reality is that we don't. We all need to do a little bit of everything. And yes, some people have strengths and weaknesses, but for the most part, we do look for that well balanced. But there's definitely room for people to really specialize in a certain aspect in other kinds of firms. I think, you know, like Kelly was saying, bigger firms, you can probably very easily, you know, if you really have a passion for, you know, be really like a bad example, like a real, like kind of like very technical kind of detailer of like curtain walls, you know, kind of like big glass facades of buildings. You can do that, and that's all you'll do, and you'll probably be very good at it.
And if you love it, great.
Yeah, right.
Some of us wouldn't want to do just that.
Yeah. I wasn't sure your question was also a little you were also trying to address types of projects, you know, or kind of like field of architecture. Is that something you're
I should admit that I'm a novice on the field, so that hadn't been what I was thinking, but that is a great point. Are there certain projects that require specialization, or could you transition from one to another?
I think, you know, I think it's hard. I think, you know, yes, some firms build a reputation and that they're gonna be, you know, doing similar work or similar kinds of work, but you know, for the most part, we don't pick our clients; they pick us. So sometimes if something comes, you're probably going to take it. So it's really hard. And I think it's hard to, you know, when you start working, to say, oh, I want to work on, you know, museums. Like, well, okay, good luck finding a firm that
maybe
does that and will hire you and is, you know, or is hiring, and you know, once thinks you're a good fit. Like, that's really hard. I have consistently, you know, ended up doing a lot of residential work, and it's almost by coincidence. And if I were to, you know, look for another job or change jobs, I probably wouldn't want to limit myself to just that. Yes, it is something that I feel comfortable doing and experienced doing, but I don't know that I would just say, oh, I only, you know, work on single family homes. Like, that's I think I'd like to keep the door more open.
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's kind of one of those things where you need to have experience to get the experience, you know, like you have to prove that you can do it for them to hire you to do it. So it is, I think getting your foot in the door is sometimes the hardest first step. But when I joined Design Lab, it was pretty early on. We were still kind of defining, you know, all the different kind of projects we would go after. But for example, we have quite a bit of work in like mid-century modern, like brutalist, you know, adaptive reuse transformation projects. But that really came out of the fact that we had library experience, and we got a library that was a brutalist library. And therefore we could, like, you know, it's like there, we had the typology, and then we started to learn about this, the technical challenges of this. And so I feel like, you know, we try to be strategic in how we think about pursuing work and going after work, and figuring out how we can kind of gather the knowledge to then get the project that we want. But it is, you know, to a certain degree up to a little bit of circumstance, and like whether you can kind of prove that you have the experience. I mean, there are some projects we would never go after because we just don't have the skill set in house, and it's not something that we particularly, you know, are passionate about. But you know, it's like a this whole like social science of how you start to, like, you know, kind of pursue and pitch and like really try to focus, when oftentimes it is a little bit out of your hands.
Given that it's maybe a moving target, or that projects find you, what skills or experience would you recommend to the architecture students on this call to get their foot in the door, or to use the time they have now to make themselves more attractive if they don't necessarily have experience in certain areas, but they're trying to gain that experience? And I guess that could be for either of you.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that it's so funny, because when I was in school one time, I remember being really critical of of my professors for always choosing these like really interesting like cultural projects and like beautiful spaces. And I'm like, when I get in the field, it's not going to be that. Like, I'm going to be like whatever, detailing like bathrooms and you know. And then I like ended up getting this job where we work with all these cultural institutions and beautiful settings, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, you know, you never really know. But I think for me, when you're in school, like, school is not the profession in a really beautiful and important way. And of course, I love academia. So I think that there's an opportunity to really think about breadth, and think about like how to make yourself curious. And I think that like understanding kind of research and data and how that can support the design process, or thinking of designing at multiple scales, or learning like multiple media or tools for design investigations. I think as much as you can kind of think about that globally, and how you learn some across a range of things, it will at least let you know what you're most suited for. You know, I think there are a lot of people in school that, like, in the process of going through school and trying projects at a lot of different scale, we would always say like either you're a doorknob or you're a tower. And like I was a doorknob, like, and like my friends did towers, and now they are working in development, like building towers all over the world. And so I feel like as much as you can kind of expose yourself to different kinds of projects and different ways of designing and investigating, at least in when you pursue a project, or you pursue like a job with a firm, you can showcase those skills. I mean, when you come in, if you don't have professional work, you're relying on a student portfolio. But I think kind of showing kind of an interest and an approach and a curiosity and an ability to kind of learn and adapt, at least from my perspective, is what people really want to see. So I think it's just, you know, some of it is like where you land and how you can kind of, you know, maybe take one job experience and launch it to the next. But I think it's really that kind of interest and curiosity and kind of design talent that is really what, you know, school is about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I used to think that when I would go for an interview and I would bring my portfolio, that the architect interviewing me would be actually judging the design of my projects. And I thought it was going to be like similar to a school review where I was actually being judged for the actual design. And
Yeah.
I think I was kind of took me probably some time to realize that people actually are looking for that kind of approach, you know, like kind of get a sense of how you would handle a problem and how you would solve that problem. So I think that's kind of the value of how of that kind of like interview process where you show your portfolio, you kind of present a problem and then your solution. So it also shows your ability to present work, because we do it all the time,
Communication. Yeah.
communication, yeah. And then also there is definitely it kind of that kind of portfolio kind of says a lot about who you are, just how you present yourself graphically. I think to all architects, it just means something, and it means whether it's a right fit for the firm or it's not. And I do a lot of interviews, and I can see a portfolio and be with someone and just kind of get a good sense whether that person is adequate or not for the position. Like you just have it says a lot. So I think I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but it is. I think it is about not so much about it's not so much about the actual design product that you have come up with. It's more about the process, and it's more about how you communicate, or how you present yourself, how you handle a certain situation.
Yeah, I think you definitely answered my question, that it's about the way you speak about what you're doing and not just kind of rote memorization. You also kind of answered a question that I wanted to follow up with, and maybe there's a little bit more you want to add. But I mean, since you mentioned that you've interviewed many candidates before, what has an intern candidate done, or someone fresh out of college, that's really impressed you during that interview? Done or said?
I think most of the time is how they handle themselves and how they present themselves. It's if somebody is able to have I usually start an interview by asking them to tell me a bit about themselves and why they're there, what are they looking for, what are their goals, what are their what is their interest in general, before jumping into looking at a portfolio. And some people are very comfortable handling that conversation for 10-15 minutes. To me, that is just means that is someone who is present, someone that is interested in learning about the firm where they're trying to get a job at, and they are kind of thinking of how they would be part of this kind of bigger team or family group, whatever you want to call it. And some people are very comfortable doing that, and some people are not. Some people just are ready to go. They have their script. They want to pull their resume, or they want to pull their recommendation letters, even though you didn't ask for them. They want to jump to their portfolio because they have a script and they want to go in order. And it just says a lot of how malleable someone is, how also kind of like mature someone is, how professionally mature. It's not about age, it's about how intellectually mature you are and able to work in a professional environment.
Kelly, would you say that's been your experience as well, as far as successful candidates and flexibility and malleability?
I totally agree. I think for me, I mean, there is I think firms have very different personalities, and you want to find a firm that is very compatible with your personality and that you are compatible with them. And I think that going into an interview, or even like sending out your stuff and knowing like what might reflect, I mean, I don't think you should like have different portfolios for different places, but I do think that like if you're sitting in an interview in front of them, you should probably have a sense of like the work that they do and the kind of the way the firm talks about their stuff. And so I feel like it's a little bit like you as the person looking for the firm need to do a little bit of research to figure out what it is that makes them tick. And I also think that finding a way, like my favorite thing in an interview is when the person comes with thought-provoking questions for us and makes us talk about what we want to be doing, what our aspirations are, in a way that's like insightful. Like you want to know that somebody's curious and thoughtful and insightful and would help you kind of grow as a firm, and kind of, it's not like, oh, and then tell me about all the details of this project, but like, what makes you tick, and like, what are you excited about, and like, what do you bring to the table, like, you know, as a human. And so I feel like, you know, for me, the best interviews that we've come out of where we're like, yes, absolutely, are the ones where we find that like amongst the people interviewing and also the people that are kind of conducting the interview, that we're having interesting conversations about like who we are and what we want to be and what that person could be within the firm.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like you have your own identity for all of the projects that you're working on, so it makes sense to find someone that's really passionate about that project and
Yeah.
that they can speak to what excites them. I have a ton more questions that I want to ask about advice, but I'm not a soon-to-be architect grad student, so I want to toss it over to my colleague Fatima just to see. Fatima, do we have any questions that have come in that we should pause now and ask from our audience?
Yes. Someone asked, what roles do interns take on at your company?
That's a great question. So yeah, what are those entry level positions or foot in the door positions?
So this varies a little bit, but like oftentimes we use like short term, like for a semester or for a summer. And oftentimes if you're coming in that role, like as a short term hire, you know, we'll have them kind of flex between things and, you know, probably place short stop and support on multiple projects, even things as much as like helping out with marketing initiatives or building models for things or things like that. We do feel like, you know, we want everybody to be kind of involved in lots of different things. So we try not to have the intern, you know, being like the coffee person or the, you know, just doing grunt work. Like we really want them to do something that's interesting and that, you know, they can contribute in a meaningful way. But I would say, you know, once, if we're saying like an intern architect, like they're fresh out of school, they're starting out, I mean, we still might have them in more of like stop position to start, but then I think as we're able to get them on a project team and working seamlessly with others, you know, that's our goal. So it's usually something that, you know, we try to get projects that are in an early phase so they can really start to kind of understand the conceptual underpinnings of a project, with the idea that, you know, again, if projects are 2 years long, by the time you complete the project, you've kind of grown up with it and you've learned certain things, you know, and for me, at least going back, like I remember I started on a project at the Emory Community Arts Center. We kind of took it from back to concept design. They changed the site on us, so we had to start back from square one shortly after I arrived. And I took that all the way from literally the first concept sketch all the way through construction. And it, you know, I was registered by the time the project was over. And so I think it's really, you know, interesting to think your arc of growth. And so for us, you know, when you start out, we will kind of get you ramped up and get you suited for, you know, kind of taking on a project and growing into an architect through that project. That's the goal.
That's perfect. That's what we hope when we're working with new organizations. We hope that our J1 interns are able to get the full scope and definitely that they're not doing the grunt work and just the basic.
No.
I mean, what about it, Robert?
I mean, we all do the grunt work.
Yeah, no, I understand
Yeah.
that. Jaime, what about it at Robert Young Architects? Is that similar, or what roles do interns do?
It's a little different. We usually have 1 or 2 interns, and they're there for at least a year. Many of them have been there for more. Like there's different ways of, I don't know if it's through your organization or not, but there's different ways of extending their their visas or they apply for other visas. So we have had a number of them who have been there for just a year, but others who have been there for longer, even 2.5 years. But let's just talk about the kind of in the 1 year scenario. We like the longer term because we do think of them as we like as part of the real team members. So we do want to assign them to our project, and our projects are they take. So our bigger project takes 2 years, but some don't, some are shorter. So it is actually a pretty good way of having somebody come and have a full experience and actually be part of the team as a an integral part of the team for most of the duration. It may not involve the construction part. You probably wouldn't be involved in that, but it will definitely be in the design phases. So we try to do that the best we can. An intern would probably be working on mainly 2 projects at the same time, and just be kind of balancing between the 2 different deadlines, different packages that have to be drawn or modeled, or the interns do tend to work a lot in presentation material, but it also means that then they get to work a lot with Robert Young, my boss and principal of the firm, because he is very involved in the especially the early design of the projects. Is that kind of so that is a kind of unique opportunity that interns have, is that kind of in a small firm is access to the name on the door. And I have experienced that not only at my current firm but also in other firms, where just because you are that kind of person who maybe actually has the freshest design kind of presentation skills, the has the better kind of modeling or rendering skills from everybody else, that then they get assigned to working a lot with the principal. But yeah, so the intern would be probably assigned to work with on a specific project, or say 2 projects, and they will be under the kind of direct supervision of a project architect who would kind of guide them and lead them. In my office, currently we have 1 intern, but we've had, I think not too long ago we had 3 at the same time. I was kind of responsible for kind of managing them all, making sure that they were all working on stuff, having enough, they're fully engaged. But the kind of day-to-day happened more with a project architect who basically just gave them tasks and reviewed their work on a daily basis.
Great. And you actually, you gave me the chance to be an expert on this panel. So for the J1 visa, 1 year is the limit for the J1 intern, and 18 months is the limit for the J1 trainee, because of the cultural exchange aspect of this visa. But there are other visas, like you mentioned, like the more along the work visas, that could be longer, could be up to 2 years. But in that theme of like cultural exchange, I'm always curious from hosts, have international interns brought a different dynamic to some of the projects versus domestic interns, or what has been the engagement between some of the interns that you've hosted from overseas and those that have come from maybe in the area?
So I will say we are on our first J1 trainee, and we adore her. She's just wonderful. I think it's what I most appreciate, just in general. I mean, she's wonderful, and we like having her as part of the team, and she's a very talented designer and communicator. But I think, it's always helpful when people have seen other ways of doing things. I think she brings a freshness just from a design perspective. Like, she's worked on lots of different kinds of projects in different countries, which, Europe in a lot of ways, I think the freedom to be creative within a historic setting is sometimes a little bit higher. So, but I think that just delivery and like how you work with things and how you kind of work through challenges and how you collaborate with consultants. I just think, you know, she's seen in very different settings in different countries, different ways of doing things. So I think it's always interesting to kind of reflect on that and think about like how we're executing the work and how we could be doing it better. Or, I mean, as a general rule, we really try at Design Lab to let the people who are in the studio and their like interests and skill sets and experience really kind of shape how we as a firm operate. You know, it's like where like the strength of us is in our collective our collective talents, not just like, you know, one person's vision that we're all carrying out. So I think that in that sense, having an international perspective is really great.
Great. I'm realizing that we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure that we get to all of the questions that the students have. Fatima, are there any other questions that that have come in throughout the presentation?
Yes. Belen asks, is it important to include designs that we have made during our time in university in our portfolio when applying?
I think it's important to show in your portfolio what you think best reflects what you will be able to give and what you hope to be doing within the firm. So if that includes, if that's all professional work and you think your schoolwork is no longer relevant, then I don't think it's necessary. But I also have seen, I've seen people who are talented designers try to come in just on the strength of their professional experience. And it's like all of this really kind of beautiful design work is no longer there. So I do think if you have professional work, it's important to in some way show that or reflect that in your set. But I think that it's really your portfolio is should be curated. And I think it should be curated in a way to show, you know, I have a range of skill sets and I have a range of interests and kind of this is who I am and who I aspire to be. Because that's what people want to see. You shouldn't just eliminate something because it's older. And, you know, like if that's like about who you are at a you know, cellular level, like that has to be in there and you have to show that and share it.
Yeah, I think curate is the right term because it shouldn't be everything. Nobody wants to sit through every project that you worked on since, you know, your first year of school. And it should really, like Kelly also said this before, you probably cannot target it to every single firm that you're interviewing with, but it should be about who you are and what you're trying to get at. It's really how you present yourself as a professional or aspiring professional, whatever you want to call yourself. It's really about, you know,
and I think
identity.
Yeah, and you should not, like, if there's something in there that you don't like, you should not include it. Like, I think that sometimes people feel like the need to be comprehensive means that you need to show everything. But like, if you worked for a firm and, you know, you didn't like the renderings that were made by the firm by someone, like, you don't have to include those things. Like, if it's not something you did, I mean, on the flip side, obviously you shouldn't show something that someone else did and kind of claim it as your own. But I just think that like sometimes there's the opinion that like every project you did in school needs to be in there. And that is not the case. I mean, even if somebody gives us the full portfolio and there's like 15 projects in an interview, we say, show us your favorite two and talk to us about those. Like we'd rather kind of understand a couple in more detail. And again, I think to your earlier point, it's more about how you communicate and kind of describe, you know, your kind of logic and thought process through it. Yeah, curate, edit back. I mean, even go back and like, if you want to expand on something, like it's your portfolio. So like, you know, I don't know. I feel like it's your opportunity to like present the best that you can give and the best that you've done.
That makes sense. And yeah, going back to the communication you're saying, being able to speak towards your work sounds like a very important facet of being an architect. I see the question indicator still flashing. So Fatima, I'm just going to let you read them off as they come in.
Okay, so what kind of software does an intern need to know in order to work at a firm like like design labs or Robert Young architecture? Or what other knowledge or skills do you wish they had already known before their internship?
I would say we actually for years worked with a software that is not super common. So we expected people to know nothing other than to have general computer skills and know some sort of BIM modeling software. I think that, you know, unless you've had a professional experience, the knowing Revit and being familiar Revit from a like design school perspective is very different than making working drawings. So, you know, from our perspective, I think we want to see that you have computer skills, that you can navigate things, and that you know a little bit about a couple of different softwares. But I think we expect you to learn a lot of that as part of the professional experience. So we wouldn't expect somebody to come in with like full working knowledge, because even between different, you know, how different firms use software is different. So there's a little bit of, it's more, you know, you can work with softwares, you know, a range of different tools that can be used in different applications, and, you know, obviously a willingness to learn and kind of learn the way that we would use it within our firm.
Yeah, I think that's similar for us. I mean, we have our own, you know, way of drawing and also modeling that, you know, it is what it is, and sometimes we don't have the newest technology, or sometimes we do. You know, like, so we can be that choosy. It's more about knowing that you're able to learn it. The one thing that I would say is helpful and is harder to, sometimes hard to find, is having a, you know, trying to have an understanding of how to actually draw architectural drawings in graphic perspective, and that's really hard because as we use the computer more and more, we're kind of trained less and less to draw two-dimensionally, and at least for our firm, that is still something that we do produce. We still produce drawing sets that are sets of plans and sets of, you know, that gets sent for construction. So we do rely on actual drawings that have a certain way of being drawn, and there's a way that's, you know, no, there's a right way and a wrong way, but there kind of is, and it is the same whether you draw it by hand or if you draw it on AutoCAD or you produce in Revit or you somehow do it in some other way. So I know that's hard to get sometimes in school because a lot of the work sometimes it just doesn't, that's not a requirement. But if you have an opportunity to work in a firm, some kind of internship while you're still a student, that's a skill that might be interesting to pick up, you know, learning about architectural representation. It's a little bit is kind of tradition in the profession, but also it is the way we communicate. It is the way we, you know, all see, you know, I can get a set of drawings from someone from 20 years ago and I can probably understand it. That's still something that we do, and it's, I think it's a valuable skill that it takes. The more you can learn of that, the more it would just benefit you. Eventually you'll learn it, you know, every firm probably does it in some way or another, you know, has to, you know, teach their employees to produce these or use these drawings, but the sooner you start, I think you have a leg up.
Excellent. Before we do wrap up, I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything that either of you were thinking to yourself, I can't believe you didn't ask. Is there any other pieces of wisdom or advice that you that we did touch on during this past hour?
I mean, I would say, I have two very quick pieces of advice. One that I already touched on, and that's that when I was in school, a professor told me I actually didn't want to be an architect all through school. I was convinced I would hate the profession, and he's the one that actually said, you know, a firm has a personality, and you need to find one that's compatible. And I think of that advice all the time, because the reason I have enjoyed the profession in kind of within Design Lab as long as I have is because we are very compatible. And so I think it's important, and not that you need that in your very first work experience, but I think thinking of things in those terms, that it's, you know, you're interviewing them as well to see if the firm's a good fit for you too. I think it's a relationship, and I think thinking of it in that term can kind of allow you to have a different perspective. And then I would just say the second quick piece of advice, and this is something that I'm kind of constantly refining for my own use, but I think that anything people can do once you're in the field to like combat toxic busyness is going to help you. And I think you need to give yourself space to think about what you want to do and what you're interested in doing and how you want to grow, and to be thoughtful. And I think it's very easy to get tied up in kind of day-to-day, like that you have to do, to not step back and reflect a little bit. And I think it's important that you give yourself space to kind of sit back and reflect and talk to people and have some in-between time just to kind of imagine and be creative. So that's my only kind of big picture advice.
2 solid pieces of advice.
I couldn't agree more about, sorry. I couldn't agree more on the you know, making sure that you're compatible. I think, you know, I always say, you know, architects don't make a lot of money. We're not here for that. You better just have fun, and not fun, but like enjoy what you're doing. Like it needs to be kind of rewarding. You know, it's there's many pros and cons to the profession, but you in general should be content with what you're doing and pursuing. I think the one advice I would give, it may be kind of contradictory, or it's also 2 pieces of advice. One is, it's great to have some kind of summer internship when you're a student. If you can, you know, use as many of those summers to, if you think you want to be an architect, even if you're an architecture student, you think you want to practice an architect, because you don't have to. There's many ways many other paths you can take. You should explore them. It's a good way of answering whether you are fit to work in an office, what kind of office you want to do. And then the other one is going back to where I started saying that I had started working like 2 weeks after I graduated from grad school. It's like, maybe it's actually kind of healthy to take some time off, because once you start, it's really hard to stop. And in 15 years that I've been working, I've only taken like a true 2-week vacation once. And I kind of missed the opportunity to have, like, you know, like take a month off and not have anything to look back. And I think that gets harder as you get older, but also as you start working, that's something that you probably it's really hard to pull off. So it's an opportunity that I missed, and I wish I could go back and, you know, have a little bit more fun, not be so uptight.
I want to thank you both again. This has been a really fun hour. I learned a lot, so I can speak for our audience on mute. I'm sure that all the students that have attended have also learned a lot. And just for everyone out there, as a reminder, we will continue this the series throughout the summer. So we'll send out some messaging in the next few weeks as we confirm additional webinars, and we'll send those details in the follow-up message along with the survey, where you can let us know any other topics that would be beneficial for you during this time. So thanks again, everyone. Be well and stay safe.
Thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
for having us. Bye.